Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland, and behind me is the house where Simon Bolivar stayed in London during a brief sojourn in 1810. So Bolivar, and I hope I pronounce his name properly, he was born in what's now Venezuela. Then it was one of the Spanish colonies in South America, and he was of Spanish stock. His ancestry was Canarian and Basque. But on his father's side, his ancestors had shifted to the American continent in the 16th century. So he was brought up as a Christian of the Catholic denomination, like really all the people of Spanish stock in Venezuela at the time. Of course, some people in the interior were following their indigenous religions. So it was a multiracial society with Spanish people, with black people who mostly held in servitude at the time, with indigenous people and a lot of people of mixed blood. So the top jobs went to those who were actually born in Spain, peninsulares, who moved out. Those who were born of Spanish stock in the New World, they were a bit below that. And the non-whites, they were discriminated against. Slavery was still there. So he was brought up largely by a slave called Hipólita. His father died when Bolivar was 3, his mother when he was 9. He had 3 sisters, 2 of whom survived. So he had a very close bond with this woman who raised him. So he's very well educated, privately tutored, having one-on-one tutorials from professors from when he was in his early teens. So was a clever chap, someone who was very inquisitive and was fascinated by political ideas. Spain and its colonies were really ruled as an absolute monarchy. Now the king, all the way back in Madrid, could have little control over what happened in the colonies because communications were just so slow. So that the governors he appointed to each audiencia or province had great latitude in what they wanted to do, but people had very few rights. So his father being a colonel in the Spanish army, they owned land, they had a plantation, so he was very privileged. But he was thought to be plotting against the authorities there, so it was thought meet that he would go to Spain. I thought, wouldn't he get even more trouble there? But anyway, he went to Spain, partly for his education as well. So upper class boys in these Spanish colonies, they often went to the old country to complete their education. So spent some time in Spain and in France. Of course, Europe was in political tumult. It was not long after the French Revolution. And he read avidly about the American Revolution too. And he was filled with admiration of these revolutionaries and thought he might bring about something similar in his birthplace. So he had a 2-year liaison with a young Spanish lady. He married her when he was 18. She was the absolute love of his life, but within months she had died, so he was distraught, and that seems to have killed all his warm feelings towards his ancestral homeland. So he also went to Milan, and he witnessed the coronation of Napoleon as King of Italy. Not a lot of people know this. Napoleon had a number of different titles besides Emperor of the French, like, I can't remember what it was, was it King of the Confederation of the Rhine or Convener of Switzerland or things like that. But now he was an anti-monarchist, Bolivar, but he could not fail to be deeply impressed by the pomp and circumstance surrounding the coronation of Napoleon and the adulation that was accorded to him, so he was perhaps a bit envious about this. So then he returned to South America, and the Peninsular War was on. So Napoleon had deposed the imbecile King of Spain and replaced him with his brother Joseph, and the King of Spain had acquiesced because he was just weak-minded. Joseph, that being Napoleon's eldest brother, his elder brother got supposedly the best realm because it included all those Latin American countries. But many Spanish people said, we're not having this. Joseph is not a proper king, and so on Cinco de Mayo they rebelled in Madrid, and there was this guerrilla warfare in the Spanish countryside, so the French army was fighting against them. There were many atrocities on both sides. So the British and the Portuguese weighed in, fighting alongside the Spanish guerrillas, so the French army was just mired in the Spanish countryside in this war in which really no quarter was given. But it's because of that, back in Latin America, Simon Bolivar could rebel against the Spanish authorities, claiming to be a loyal rebel, loyal to the real King of Spain, not Joseph, the French usurper. And of course, authorities in Madrid, well, whether it was the real Spanish royal family or was it the Bonapartists, they were so busy fighting in Spain, they couldn't exert any control in South America. So from 1808, he led his War of Independence, and that wasn't really completed for about 20 years, but gradually gaining control of more and more of the country. So he rode 123,000 kilometers, almost the length and breadth of the continent of South America. So liberating, as he would see it, Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia, and parts of Uruguay. Uruguay didn't exist at the time, and he wanted to take some Spanish colonies in the Caribbean, those islands, but he didn't manage to. And Mexico, going through the same experience at the same time. All the little countries in Central America, like Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Panama, and so on. Some of these countries didn't exist until the mid-19th century because they broke up. So he wanted to unite all the Spanish-speaking countries of the American continent. Now that didn't happen. He did manage to unite several of them. You know, there was New Spain and New Granada, and so on. And he's unique in being the only person who's been president of 4 different countries. The president of Gran Colombia, which is bigger than Colombia is today, of Peru, of Bolivar, and of Venezuela. Bolivia. So Bolivia was later founded and named in his honor in his lifetime. So he's a caudillo, as in a leader. And there's an apocryphal tale when he said that the continent would be cursed by caudillismo, as in these military strongmen seizing power and having some ludicrous cult of the personality. Unfortunately, he's largely right, because that was how the dispensation through the 19th century went into the 20th century, either right-wing or left-wing despots. So he supposedly believed in liberal ideas, freedom of expression, and no racial discrimination, the abolition of slavery. Well, he did actually introduce some of that, and that's all laudable. But he ruled as a dictator, you might say. Needs must where the devil drives. You know, in extremis, he simply needed to assume these untrammeled powers, suspend habeas corpus, and all the rest of it. And he was not above pillaging in order to win, as in stripping churches of gold and silver in order to pay his soldiers, and he did win like that. But he recognized that some of his people were rather unworthy, were not actuated by noble motives, and behaved appallingly. So he fought in many battles, victorious many times. He was a man of the most extraordinary energy. So he was just boundless in his ambition, and he achieved so very much. He had a falling out with Miranda, who also lived here actually about a mile away, not quite at the same time, and astonishingly had him arrested and handed over to the Spanish authorities, who perhaps surprisingly didn't execute him. So Miranda was a rival independence leader. He knew San Martin, the Argentine independence leader, but he didn't manage to create this mega country of all the Spanish-speaking lands in South America or Central America. So his vision was not achieved. And obviously it was incredibly difficult trying to set up this new nation. And we know Spanish is the official language, but a lot of people of indigenous stock did not speak those languages, and the distances were huge. There were no railways in those days, had to go by horseback over narrow mountain passes, over jungle, through the desert. So communications were very, very slow indeed. It was very difficult for the government to exert power far away. I know you could sail, but that's only really good from getting from one part of the coast to another. And even then, sometimes the winds or the tides might be against you. So that was him. Then he finally decided he was going to be retired, he was going to leave the country. I'm not quite sure why I thought he should leave the country. And he died in 1830 in Santa Marta, Colombia, just before he could sail for Europe. He wanted all his personal papers burnt, and O'Leary, who was his aide-de-camp, vowed to do so, but he in fact reneged on that and kept them, and historians are very grateful that we have all his personal papers. So he's buried in a mausoleum in Caracas, Venezuela. He was exalted by Hugo Chavez. Other people say that really he was not such a liberator, he was something of an oppressor as well. He did very little for the poor. He had a number of paramours after his wife died. He swore he would never wed again, and indeed he honoured that. He had no children. He appears to have been infertile. Now there's this theory that he was poisoned, but his body was exhumed, but they found out that he actually wasn't poisoned. I can't remember what he died of, some disease. So he died at the age of only 47. So it was a life filled with the most astonishing degree of accomplishment, even if you disagree with him, in 47 years. To have a country named after him, to found several countries, and to be exalted to this day, so many memorials to him all around the world. So that is Simon Bolivar. Okay, toodaloo.